The opinions expressed on the following program are strictly those of its host, guests, and callers, and not those of the station, its staff, management, or its sponsors. Any opinion expressed should not be considered as legal advice, fact, or law. Please consult qualified legal counsel if you have legal questions.
Welcome to the Controversial Radio Network. It's 7 o'clock. This is The Other Side of the Story with Attorney Eugene Ellis, Mr. DUI, and Scott Wood.
Good evening, San Diego, and good tidings to those of you listening worldwide on the Internet. I'm Scott Wood, alongside Attorney Eugene Ellis. He's known as Mr. DUI. Mr. DUI is one of the preeminent DUI attorneys in Southern California. With over 30 years of legal experience, 28 of those have been dedicated to practicing traffic and DUI law. Mr. DUI has appeared on NBC's Face the Nation, as well as numerous other local TV news programs here in San Diego. If you'd like to contact Mr. DUI regarding any legal matter, his phone number is 866-NO-DUI. That is 866-666-6384. It may also be reached via his website, www.mrdui.com. This hour, however, is dedicated to researching, explaining, and exposing those mysteries in life that you may not hear about on the local and national news programs. We'll bring you the facts, and we'll let you formulate your own opinion. Our website is www.contronews.com. You'll find bios of both Gene and myself, previews of upcoming shows, as well as links to websites that we mentioned in the program. And with that, I will bring in my good friend, Mr. DUI, Attorney Eugene Ellis. How you doing, Gene?
Hi, Scott. Today we have a super-duper really great program, but as usual, I want you to go grab a pencil and a paper. There's normally very important things you'll need to write down. This is a pre-recorded show. It's being recorded on January 14th, 2006. So no call-ins this time, folks, please. Certainly, if you really like the program, which I know you are going to, and you contact the doctor through his website, he just might consent to come back on live. Some of the basics before we get rolling, just so you remember, this show is designed to talk about things that the average licensed stations won't talk about for whatever reason. They're told not to. Their license will get jerked if they do or whatever. Number two, it talks about a lot of things that are on the fringe of science, at least in reference to what they tell us. So, but I'm going to try to limit my programs to science that has in fact been tested in various scientific institutions, and I have doctors, PhDs, various other laser scientists and so forth talking about sciences which you're not going to hear about normally, altered states, remote viewing, and that sort of thing. There are no witches, and none of the kind of fluky, far-out stuff. I'll try to get subjects that have been tested and have some credibility to them. We depend on government and scientific whistleblowers to bring us some of this material. Most of them will identify themselves. Some of them will not for obvious reasons. XEPE, Controversial News Network, where the truth is often stranger than fiction. What if I told you there are actually two governments out there in the United States, running the United States? One such government was operating without the permission or even the knowledge, in some cases, of congressmen, senators, and sometimes even presidents. These people who live in the shadows control and influence such earth-shaking developments that if they were made known to the public, we would be able to reap the benefits of clean air, not nearly the wars and conflicts that we see now, and yet they're kept secret by a small group accountable in some cases only to themselves. Our guest speaker today, and we're so honored to have, is Stephen M. Greer, MD, a medical doctor, an emergency room physician, and if you know anything about medicine, you know those are probably the brightest. They have to think on their feet and do amazing things. He is the founder and international director of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, CSETI. Are you writing, guys and gals out there? widely regarded as the world's foremost authority on UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence. He's written a definitive book on the account of UFOs. The subject in his book, Extraterrestrial Contact. And in fact, the name of the book is Extraterrestrial Contact, The Evidence and Implications by Stephen M. Greer, M.D. One point I wanted to make is that the doctor has led research teams throughout the world investigating the existence of the extraterrestrial entities, and on several occasions has successfully established preliminary contact and communication with extraterrestrial spacecraft at close range. With that, Dr. Greer, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. Why don't we start with that last very interesting sentence out of your book. Would you tell my listeners a little bit about these contacts with these space vehicles?
Well, it's sort of a way of introduction. My uncle designed the lunar module that landed on the moon, took Neil Armstrong to the moon. And as a young child, I learned of things which I was not supposed to know about. And it also coincided with me having a sighting of one of these disc-shaped craft in broad daylight that was obviously not a conventional aircraft. Mm-hmm. And it sort of ignited a lifelong interest in this subject, even though it's sort of a subject that's followed with a lot of social opprobrium. And I was encouraged later by a number of aerospace and military contacts to pursue this because I formulated a hypothesis, and that was that if these things were real, and we had proven that they were, we had videotape of them, we had radar tracings of them, we had digital radar, we had people inside the covert programs who told us what they are. I posited that, look, if these objects are real, why don't we as citizen diplomats go out and try to observe them and then take it one step further and try to interact with them by signaling to them using electronic signals, lasers, whatever we can do to see if they will interact back with us. If they're under intelligent control, they ought to be able to do that. So we started that actually in 1990, and we immediately started having pretty amazing events take place. By 1992, we had vectored 4 of these objects onto a beach near Pensacola, Florida, that were signaling to us. We have videotape of this. That we made a big triangular formation in the sky with these very bright lights we had. They then fell into a perfect triangular shaped formation. This went on for about 20 minutes. It actually got photographed by some other people in the area and was in the newspaper the next day. And this, of course, got the attention of the National Military Command Authority and the head of Army Intelligence, who invited me to a meeting to try to get us to stop it. Of course, we didn't stop it. We continue to do this all over the world. And by 1993, we had made a number of these sort of contacts. And by the way, these are described in the book you mentioned. It's, people can get it. Disclosureproject.org is the main website we use. Disclosure Project is all one word, and then .org, O-R-G, because we're a nonprofit. And what I found was that there was an enormous number of people in very shadowy, super secret projects who knew all this was real, but were keeping it secret from most of our representatives and certainly from the president at the time. And because of that, and because we realized that there's only so much we could do as sort of citizen researchers who were unfunded and also citizen diplomats who had no official standing, to take this too far, that we needed to disclose this. And so we started something now called the Disclosure Project. And as a consequence, we identified, as of this time, over 450 whistleblowers who are top secret military intelligence and in some cases corporate people who have first-hand knowledge of these projects, of the technologies, and of the phenomenon. And again, these are not people whose names are redacted. These are people who are name, rank, serial number. We have their DD-214s, which are their discharge forms from the military, if that's appropriate. We have, smoking gun government documents. We have photographs. We have all this. So what we did was basically go around and unofficially depose these people and interview the first 110 of these military top secret whistleblowers. and in 2001 until now have been putting that evidence and information out to the public, as well as continuing this effort at Contact. So the project has evolved over the last 15 years, and it's become something at this point that we can certainly prove what we're claiming. The question is, how do we get society to understand the implications of this and begin to demand that the truth be let out, and also with the truth, with the technology. A lot of people will ask, well, why the hell is all this being kept secret? And I say, well, these things are not traveling at interstellar speed using Exxon Jet A fuel. They are using a type of physics which has been studied for many decades in classified projects, which have been actually very well figured out. And certainly by the 1950s and 60s, we as a civilization did not need gas, oil, or coal. And most people, if they have an IQ over about 80, the light bulb will go off and they'll go, oh my God, no wonder it's been kept secret. Because we're talking about, if you disclose the truth about what these UFOs are, and with it their means of propulsion and energy, you will basically start a whole new civilization on this planet. Forget about other planets, where we're not going to need Middle East oil. We're not going to need to have global warming and pollution. We're not going to have 80% of the planet in poverty, while the other 20% of us have heat and air conditioning and SUVs. So it would be a complete change in the way the Earth functions. And the secrecy has to do with macroeconomic and transnational power and an elite group of people who control that, and not with national security. Unfortunately, it's like Mark Twain said, patriotism and sometimes, religion can be the last refuge of the scoundrel. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially, people will cite, oh, well, this has got to be kept secret for national security reasons. Nothing could be further from the truth. Our national security obviously is being profoundly injured by our ongoing addiction to Mideast oil, and because of that, the subsequent oil wars and the geopolitical problems attendant there too. So what I point out to people is that it would be in our national security interests in the U.S., never mind for the benefit of humanity, to let the information out, let it be known that we are not alone in the universe, but also let it be known that there are very well-developed technologies, mainly held by corporations such as Northrop, Lockheed, E-Systems, SAIC, right there in San Diego is a key one. And these entities have the technologies which we taxpayers have funded to have studied that could enable us to get completely off of nuclear and fossil fuel power systems, which would be an enormous transformation of the fortunes of humanity. But the secrecy that we have uncovered, and by the way, what I'm stating can be proven. We wrote a book, came out a couple years ago, called Disclosure, and in it are about 70 of these top secret military and corporate witnesses' testimony. And by the way, I think all but one or two of them are named. So this is not as if it's some, like a 60 Minutes episode where they have the face fuzzied out and, you don't know who they are. These are people who have stepped forward with us to speak the truth, and they have brought with them, in many cases, top secret documents, which are also in this book. And you can get that at disclosureproject.org is the website for that. So the entire issue of are we alone in the universe, and sort of the academic and very exciting question of that, which is no small matter, is sort of almost an existential and transcendent question about life in the universe. But there are also very critical, important, pressing issues that the subject entails, which most people don't realize. And I point out that, if it was just a matter of some of these classified projects acknowledging that there's life in outer space that have detected us, which is a very high probability, even by mainstream science, to say that there's life out there somewhere, that wouldn't be the big issue. The big issue is that if you acknowledge they're here, and if you acknowledge that, in fact, we have been studying these things, and in a few cases have actually targeted and destroyed and downed some of these extraterrestrial vehicles and have reverse engineered their energy and propulsion systems, what you get to is that you very quickly get to the realization that this sort of obscene and illegal secrecy, what I call the kleptocracy, which is actually calling the shots in the world today, have kept this secret because if it were to come out, their $100 trillion proven oil reserves would be worth very, very little. They'd only be worth the value of lubricants and synthetic plastics and things of this sort. We certainly wouldn't need oil or gas or nuclear power nameplate shift in the geopolitical history of the Earth and would far and away eclipse the revolution of the Industrial Revolution of the mid-18 and late 1800s. So it's a very, very serious issue that gets laughed at a lot. People think, oh, well, it's little green men and things like the X-Files and silly movies and whatnot. In reality, all that silliness has been put out into the public through the mainstream media, which are shills for this transnational kleptocracy, because they want people to make light of the issue because the issue actually has so much gravity associated with it.
The owners of these oil reserves, that would be the Arab nations, I presume.
Well, no. You look at Pakistan. You look at even in the U.S. It's Russia's the only bright spot in all of Russia's economy is oil right now. So it's actually Venezuela, for example, or Mexico is a net exporter of oil. So is Canada, for that matter. I mean, the energy sector is the 8,000-pound gorilla. It's the King Kong sitting, on the corner there, looking out over everything. It is the means by which the entire industrialized world operates. And if you change that equation, you change geopolitical power, I think in a good way, forever. But those who have that kind of power do not want to go quietly into that dark night. And they are, hell-bent on keeping these sorts of information secret as well as the technologies, I believe, because they simply do not want to give up the enormous wealth and power that a centralized energy grid a priori requires.
Yeah. So the Standard Oils, the Shell, and these people and their various secret corporations that own parts and don't want you to know about it, and so on and so on, and the international banking organizations who this money flows through. Out of these groups would become the people that are really lobbying or controlling nations, in fact. And these groups are the ones that are basically behind keeping this all secret, as opposed to the people that we might have previous to this thought were doing it. Is that a fair statement? But not necessarily the Arabs.
Yeah, in part. There are a number of factions to this issue of secrecy. There are people who simply don't want to rock the boat from a financial point of view. It's not just about energy. It's about the entire geopolitical structure. For example, let me give you an example of this. What would happen if you had a device that extracted energy from what's called zero-point energy, or the quantum vacuum energy field, which is the space around us, not outer space, but just right here, say, in the room where you're sitting? That these technologies do that. What that means is that you could have a generator that would extract energy from this potential, what's called the potential of energy that's in the vacuum, every cubic centimeter of which has enough power to run the Earth for a day. Now, what would happen is that you would not have transmission lines, you would not have a centralized electric grid, you would not have a centralized supply system, but with that also would have this enormous blossoming of culture and civilization and prosperity and abundance in parts of the world that are now very poor. Yeah. And I have to point out to people, your geopolitical power on Earth does not draw from your population. I mean, India has 4 times or 3 times the population of the United States. Certainly doesn't have 4 times our geopolitical power. So it has to do with your economic and technological prowess. This would change all those equations. And so geopolitical power would shift away from the Great White Father and sort of a transnational racist kleptocracy to what I think would be a seriously global system, a globe of very empowered local villages that would be able to manufacture, generate electricity, generate power without this sort of dependency on the zero-sum game, this little pie of conventional energy, which, let's face it, if 6 billion people started living like you and I do, we would be out of fossil fuels very quickly, and the price of a gallon of gas would probably be $10 to $20 a gallon. So we have a world right now that is designed to be very inequitable, but it also maintains a certain power status quo. What we're talking about is releasing information that would not only run at the assumptions maybe of Orthodox religion, but also Orthodox science and Orthodox geopolitical power. So it is one of the real forbidden areas of knowledge, and that's why it is ridiculed so soundly. It's interesting because in my career of dealing with this, I'm an emergency doctor by training and got involved with this from family connections and what have you. I have personally done briefings for a sitting CIA director, President Clinton's first CIA director, and I spent 3 hours going through all this data and the implications of what this means. And I have seen grown men, old enough to be my father, grandfather in some cases, weep when they look at what is going on this planet and the fact that the people that you and I think are running the United States or running the world really are the emperors that have no clothes. I mean, for the most part, it's sad to say, and it's terribly true. When I was briefing the Clinton administration and his inner circle and his CIA director, one of his good friends came to me, to my phone personally, and we call them FOBs, the Friends of Bill. And he said, Dr. Greer, we are very supportive of this idea of this being disclosed. But if the president does what you're recommending, because I was recommending that he step into this issue with an executive order and get control of these out-of-control military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about, that this man turned to me and he says, we're convinced that he'll end up like Jack Kennedy. And I burst out laughing. Actually, I started laughing thinking the guy was just joking. This was back in 1994. No. And he says, no, we're not joking.
No, I know.
So this is the kind of stuff I have been dealing with since the early 90s. And I'm actually about to, in a couple of months, I'm going to come out with an autobiography talking about all these meetings and what actually happened on the inside of this project. Mm-hmm. Most people blow their minds to contemplate. But the issue really is critical that folks around the world understand that we have, on the one hand, a very dysfunctional current situation where there is a transnational kleptocracy mainly driven by money and power that runs this sort of issue, and that the representatives of people, whether it's in the United States or in Great Britain or any other country, know very, very little about it. I mean, I have personally met with members of the Senate Intelligence Committee here in the United States and the U.S. Congress. I'm making this phone call today from Washington, D.C. I'm looking at the Capitol Dome from where I'm sitting. And those people will look at me and say, I have no doubt that this is true, but I have made inquiries about this in closed meetings, and they don't tell us a thing. They don't tell us a damn thing. So, Senator Claiborne Pell, who was chairman of Foreign Relations, told me that. Senator Dick Bryan, who was on the Senate Intelligence Committee, told me that. So what you have here is a disconnect. Most people out there think, oh, well, if you're the president or you're on one of these key committees in the Senate, or if you're a key person on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you're going to know about this. It isn't necessarily true. The people who are involved with this have very little to do with their rank and outward position in society. It has more to do with whether or not they're willing to go along with the agenda of secrecy, of continued centralized control, and quite frankly, a very, very illegal operation. We can prove that this operation is keeping the secret, has broken virtually every relevant law and have been rogue since at least the 1950s. One of Eisenhower's aides, who was a young man at the time, Brigadier General Lovkin, his testimony is at our website, disclosureproject.org. He stated point blank that he saw Eisenhower in the last years of his presidency, 59 and 60, very, very concerned about this issue. He was making inquiries about what was going on with the UFO matter. He knew we had aircraft up scrambling, chasing them. He knew that there were clandestine projects studying the technologies, but that he had been shoved aside of control over it. And basically, I'm paraphrasing what the general said, but General Lovkin said basically he was stabbed in the back. And a lot of people wondered, why did a conservative Republican, a five-star general president, Eisenhower, when he left office in January of 61, make that famous speech where he talked about the military-industrial complex escaping our oversight and being a threat to our security. This is what he was talking about. Now, it's interesting because I have a letter written by Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, who was the first CIA director. And when he left that position in 1961, right after Eisenhower made this statement, he had wrote a letter to Congress. It also went to the New York Times where he said, through official ridicule, people are made to think that the UFO matter is nonsense. He says, in a reality, it's a very, very great concern. And he says, and the whole matter of the secrecy surrounding it is a threat to our national security. He made it very clear that the extraterrestrial vehicles, or these so-called UFOs, were not a threat. If they were a threat, given their multi-100,000-year technological edge over us, it would be point-set match all over but the shouting. He was stating that the secrecy surrounding the issue was a threat to the national security of the United States of America, and this was an admiral who had been a CIA director. So we have put together all these documents and all this testimony and a lot of hard evidence, radar tracking, digital tapes, everything. And that's available at this website, disclosureproject.org. A lot of people say, hey, where's the smoking gun on this? I said, well, we have it. Who's looking at it, though?
Right, and a couple of other points. Now, folks, you're writing this down, right? You're getting this web page. One thing that I want to make clear, books are great, and, you know, I read on average of 1 or 2 a week here, just besides my regular law practice, just preparing for my shows, and they're great. But what the doctor's organization and the doctor has put together, folks, is something that's even more important. You've got DVDs and videos of these people. Now, as an attorney, I can tell you that I wouldn't trade anything for the ability to look in a man's eyes, listen to his voice, watch his demeanor. I mean, they can talk all about these fancy, sophisticated voice stress analyzers, throw them all out the window. A good old human, whether he's a butcher, a baker, or a candlestick maker, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. They may not be able to put a rocket together, but they can generally smell a liar.
Yes.
And when you're looking at the doctor's videos and DVDs and hours of them, and if I have time, which I probably won't, but if I do, I'll go through some of the testimony I got off some of the tapes, and you're looking in their eyes, and you know to the bottom of your toes that these men and women in some cases are telling the absolute truth. And if you can't accept what's happening after looking at that, then you have a block of some sort, some inner driving superlative motive that's causing you not to be able to accept this. But everybody else will. So the books are great, but the videos, the DVDs are a must. Because when you go to talk to your friends after you're convinced, you just send them a gift video, send them a gift DVD, and they're going to turn out and they're going to, see it your way. Let's go back just for a second. A couple of the comments that you made, Doctor, about this being about power, and I really do buy that. It seems like the human entity is really power-driven. They suck it up like I don't know what. Even look at the local gas and electric companies. You can actually get your own generator. You can actually generate electricity, and then your excess electricity in some states, by law, they have to buy it back. And boy, they fight that like crazy.
Sure.
And it's really amazing because it's the centralization of power. It seems to be there's a little spot in the human brain that is reserved for that quest for power. What happens, folks, after you're so rich? You can only eat so many chocolate ice cream sundaes. You can only drive well, I know my clients drink other than that, but you can only drive in so many Rolls Royces, and then after that, what's left? Power. The power.
And that's what it's about. It's not about money the way you and I think of it. It's really about massive amounts of control and power. And I often joke, I don't know what's wrong with these guys. Maybe they weren't breastfed long enough or something. But, it's like, good grief. And I have actually met personally with some of the people who are in the Central Control Policy Group that deals with this. And they really do get very, very drunk on power and on the fact that they have this enormous control over the world. And so that eventually is what it becomes all about. And it is a sickness. It becomes almost like an endlessly addictive thing to get more and more into that kind of need to control. And this, of course, information isn't only just about money and power and energy. It also, in a sense, I know that this has been true for a long time. There are certain very orthodox religious traditions that don't want to know that this could be true. Now, I mean, not most mainstream religions that could deal with this quite well. I personally have met with the representatives of the Pope and at the Vatican, and they have no problem with the fact that there's life in the universe. But, if you believe the Earth is 6,000 years old, and you have a very sort of almost simian, primitive view of such a thing, you're not going to like to hear the idea that there are intelligent life forms out there that perhaps have been observing us for decades, if not longer, and perhaps thousands of years. But ultimately, we have to get this information out because on top of the fact that we're ruining the planet and increasing the likelihoods of injustice and terrorism and hatred of the West through the economic disparity that the zero-sum game of oil creates, you have another problem, and that is there is a covert program dealing with this issue that has not had the oversight of the Congress or of the people that's been going on now for at least 60 years. And they have been doing some very dangerous and reckless things on behalf of humanity. For example, imagine the risk of a group of people who have an intrinsically militaristic and xenophobic view of the world, looking at these objects and saying, gee, let me see if I can target one of these and knock them down, and develop electromagnetic pulse weapons and other very high-tech electromagnetic systems that can target and hit and disable, not all the time, but on numerous occasions, extraterrestrial vehicles that are coming from another solar system. This is dangerous. I mean, there are actions that have been taken on behalf of the human race that the human race is not aware of. I remember in the 1990s personally meeting with the Boutros-Ghali family, the head of the United Nations, and Mrs. Boutros-Ghali and I had this long talk about this, and she looked just horrified. She says, do you have people who have been on the inside of these projects where you can confirm this has happened? I said, yes, ma'am. Multiple independent people, generals, brigadier generals, technicians, radar operators, where they have been present, where they've seen these things happen. And she just looked horrified. She said, well, this could be one of the greatest threats to humanity and world peace we've ever faced. I said, of course it is, but no one's talking about it. Who's talking about it? Peter Jennings? I don't think so. He knows the truth now from the other side, maybe. But the fact of the matter is, the big mainstream media, I believe, is the single biggest problem to getting the truth out. I have personally seen ABC News and other big networks get very close to popping this story using a lot of the documents and top secret witnesses we've identified, and then the executive producer of the show will call me up and say, well, they're not going to let us air this. I'll say, why not? And they'll say, well, you know why. And I say, well, who told you not to do this? And they'll say, well, Dr. Greer, you know who. And it's a very disconcerting thing because the fourth estate, as it's called, or the media, is supposed to be one of the checks and balances to these sort of things getting out of control. But when you have a corrupted big media, this sort of transnational, multi-billion-dollar media that is horizontally and vertically integrated into the economic power system, you have, unfortunately, the ability to really corrupt the news that the public are getting. And that's what's happened. And so many people have asked me, where do you lay the biggest blame for this? And I say, well, the media. In terms of the most corrupt institution in the world today is the big media.
Now, there's and let's talk about that a little bit more. By the way, are the Bilderbergers, is that an example of the types of groups that are controlling this, or can you even say who these groups are?
Sure, I can. The fact of the matter is people who launch sweeping conspiracies about this are always uniformly incorrect. And here's what I mean by that. If you look at the situation, there will be a few people associated with the Bilderbergers or with the Bohemian Grove meetings, because I've been up there at Bohemian Grove in Northern California, or with the Trilateral Commission or the Council on Foreign Relations, and I know people with all these groups. And some of them, there may be a couple of people in those groups who are involved and know, but they are control points for the rest of their group, and they will go to a meeting if this issue comes up and say, oh, none of this is true. I was in such and such a secret project, and we found that it was all swamp gas, or we found that it was all misperception of astronomical phenomena. They are paid to lie to their own brethren. And, society is organized around social subcultures. And it's like doctors listen to doctors, attorneys listen to attorneys, et cetera, and so on. So the peerage of these sort of groups, like you're mentioning, is such that if someone in their group of stature who's on the inside of these covert programs says to them, oh, don't worry about that, it's not true, they will accept that as true. Now, I'm not saying this theoretically. I know this has happened for a personal fact, because I have people who have been at meetings where this has happened with the Bohemian Grove and the Bilderbergers and other things. So what you have is it's a much smaller group of people who really know what's going on these issues than most people would assume. And in fact, that makes sense. It's really the only way you can keep things wrapped up as tightly as this has been for decades.
Are you at liberty to name some of the groups that are behind this?
Well, I mean, I think that the corporations I named have key people in compartmented operations that deal with this. For example, I mentioned SAIC, which is headquartered there in La Jolla, and it's one of the crown jewels of these covert programs. Lockheed Skunk Works has been involved with this for years and has a compartmented operation. And remember, compartmented means anyone who's not in that compartment doesn't know what's going on. For years, there have been programs with Northrop, which is now Northrop Grumman, dealing with this. E-Systems, which has now been taken over by Raytheon, have had projects. And then within the government, there are a few members of the Congress who know, and I know who they are. For example, Senator John Warner of Virginia knows about these and has been involved since he was an Undersecretary of the Navy. I have a document with his name on it that he signed back then in the 60s. You have certain members of the military who know, but most don't. I have personally done briefings for the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency and the head of intelligence for the Joint Staff, what's called the J2 position, as the Joint Chief of Staff, head of intelligence. Those men at the time were being kept in the dark because the people in these projects knew that they would not go along with an illegal secret project, a black project that would run this illegally. So essentially, as I said earlier, it isn't a rank, but it's sort of like this diffuse, amorphous effort, but it's actually pretty well organized. It's just that it's got little tentacles that go into every agency and many, many corporations. There have been key operations with the National Security Agency and the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, dealing with this. I also know that there have been DIA operations that have dealt with satellite imaging of these objects, and yet, when I met with the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, he was not lying. This general turned to me and he said, I have no doubt that this is true because I'm looking here at all this evidence and the testimony of people who have been there. He said, but I have made inquiries through the chain of command at my command here at the DIA, and they all tell me that no projects are dealing with this. And I said, yes, sir, they would do that if they assess that you would not, in the long run, go along with the secrecy. So that is the sine qua non. I mean, the entry requirement to this group is that people are tested little by little to see if they will go along with this kind of very, very tight secrecy. And if they think you won't, they're not going to tell you. I don't care if you're the president or the Secretary of Defense. Back in the 90s, I met with a man who had been the Minister of Defense in Great Britain for years, a man named Lord Phil Norton. And he was a 5-star admiral. Back then they called him a Sea Lord. And Lord Phil Norton and I met at his home there in Hampshire. And he listened to all this. He was very interested in what we were doing with the Clinton administration and Pentagon and the Congress. And he said, I was head of the Ministry of Defense, and with that, of course, in Great Britain, also meant that he was head of MI5 and MI6 and all the intelligence operations. He says, I was also head of the Military Committee for NATO, and I never heard anything about this subject. Why wouldn't they have told me? And I looked at him and I said, well, sir, with all due respect, let me answer your question with a question. What would you have done if you had found out that there was a transnational group that did not obey the rule of law, that had engaged in assassination, extreme secrecy, and were sitting on technologies that could be the solution to many of the world's gravest and most pressing problems? He said, I wouldn't have stood for it for one bloody minute. He got very agitated. And I said, well, that's why they didn't tell you. I said, it's almost, it's so obvious that you have to kind of analyze it. They're not going to tell people about things like this unless they're really, really certain you're going to play along with the game. And occasionally there'll be a defection from that group. We've had some pretty notable ones who have come forward with our project. But unfortunately, there's a big risk of them, being threatened or ridiculed or what have you. So it takes a lot of courage to deal with something like this. And as I've often pointed out, the whistleblower syndrome, where a lot of people want to tell the truth about something, but they're intimidated from doing so. What we've done with the Disclosure Project is to say, okay, let's not have 2 or 3 people do this. Let's have dozens and dozens and dozens of men and women come together at once and come forward. And that's what we did. We put together the evidence. And as you mentioned, we have a 4-hour videotape of these top secret witnesses. We also have a 2-hour tape and also a 1-hour tape that's shorter if you don't want to look at the 2 to 4 hours of this. So get this and can listen to these people and see their credentials and judge for themselves whether these people are telling the truth.
At www.disclosureproject.org, folks, write it down. You've got to go. You've got to see it. I mean, I look at a lot of material, and I thought I followed all the UFO stuff, and the good doctor, has material on there that simply is not on what you're going to see on television, and it's going to blow your socks off. Also, this subject of compartmentalism and how it's been able to be kept secret is really brought out in the tapes by the military people, because to just say it's compartmentalized and that's how it's kept secret doesn't really explain it in the depth that it needs to be kept. How certain people with the same security clearance are not allowed, and you'll hear this not from Dr. Greer, not from one individual, no matter how well credentialed he is, but from majors and generals and various other people on his tapes. And when you look at that, you are going to get a whole new view of life. Now, I'm going to bring out one other thing too, Doctor. This business of power and control, controlling the media. Even there's a license with this station, and when my contract is up, we'll find out if they want me back. But the point is this, that control of everything. Originally, when our founding fathers put the government together, they gave the press a tremendous amount of power, because they never envisioned thousands and thousands of small newspapers being corrupted by any single source. But what they did not envision was the wire services. So you have newspapers all across the country, and they're reporting, their local reporters are reporting on Aunt Nellie's cow went into Joe Blow's garden and ate the roses. But what they're not reporting is the important news, the national news. They're getting it from 3 or 4 major sources. If I want to corrupt an entire nation of news, I am not going to infect the local newspapers. I am going to send my agents, and over a period of decades, I am going to infect the wire services. And that is what's been done. You control the wire services and the major papers and electronic media, and you will control the eyes of the dinosaur.
Correct. And this is exactly what happened. If you look at, for example, the Washington Post company that also owns Newsweek, which is one of the major news magazines, of course, I was talking to one of the military and national security correspondents for the Washington Post, and he flat out told me, he says, I have a whole file on stuff like this. He says, but we'll never put it in the Washington Post. He says, and he looked at me and winked. He says, no important story is ever reported in the Washington Post.
That's right.
And I looked at him, and I said, well, then what's happened to the Fourth Estate? He says, it's dead. Yeah. And no less a figure than a guy named Schwartz, who had been on the board of Time Warner, back before it was AOL Time Warner. He told me, he says, he was very good friends with Mike Wallace at 60 Minutes. He says, essentially, he says, remember, at that time, he said, CBS was owned by Westinghouse. Westinghouse is one of the biggest defense contractors. Westinghouse has these sort of technologies. And so General Electric, which owns NBC and MSNBC. So what you find is that it's a very, very small world, and you're correct. It isn't hard to make a sort of like an hourglass chokehold of information. But with that then comes a dumbing down of the populace and a sort of fictionalizing of the truth and having it spun in a way where people really don't know what to think. And it's interesting because when I've met with people who are, very powerful generals or admirals at the Pentagon or members of Congress, they will turn to me and they say, well, all I know about this stuff is what I've seen in the tabloid media or on a Discovery Channel thing and whatnot. He says, now we don't know what to believe. Because if they go into a meeting and make an inquiry, even a closed top secret meeting, they're basically told nothing, or they're told no such project exists. And it's interesting because if you look at the witnesses that we have on videotape, over and over again, they'll say, yep, this is exactly how it operated. If they were in a project where something like this happened or was seen, they would say, you weren't here, this didn't happen, no such project exists, and boom, it's erased.
No.
And that is exactly what happens. I give one example. We have a man who was Earl Shane McDowell, who had a top secret clearance and worked at he was underneath the Commander-in-Chief Atlantic Command near Virginia Beach in Norfolk area. And they had an event happen where one of these enormous ET craft came in off the northern coast of North America, northeastern coast, and it ended up being tracked on at least 5 separate military radar systems. We scrambled jets to intercept it. Admiral Harry Train, who later became on the board of SAIC there in La Jolla in San Diego, gave the order to down this object, to force it down. It was an enormous object. It was broad daylight. They did get a jet close enough to it to actually get a photograph of it, which this top secret witness saw. He says while this event was happening, it was just astonishing. He said it was sheer chaos. They went to full code zebra, which means unless you have zebra stripes on your lapel, you have to get out of the command center, and there are Marines there that if in 60 seconds you're not out, they will shoot to kill anyone without zebra stripes on. This is how critical an event this was. And we made the enormous mistake of giving the order to try to force this huge thing down. Well, eventually what happened is the Admiral Train got on the hot phone to Russia and to everyone in the United States, confirmed that it was neither Soviet nor U.S. and it was obviously from outer space. It then went out over by the Azores and tilted about 60 degrees and then bam, shot straight out into space and was gone almost instantly. Well, this event, by the way, very well documented event. This man said that later that day there were people in suits, they didn't even know what agency they came from, came into that command center and threatened every single person, but the fear of God in every single person that was there, and said, look, you will have more trouble for you, your parents, any kids you ever have, everything. If you ever mention this, you weren't here, this never happened. They went in, they confiscated the photograph of the thing, all the digital tape, all the radar tapes, everything was sanitized. It was never seen again. Now, that is exactly how it's done. It's chilling. The efficiency of this kind of operation and the ruthlessness of it. So you have that going on when something major happens. Now, the chances then that you're going to have the media get wind of it and they're going to follow through with it is not very good. Why? Because even if they got wind of it, I have a document on our website, disclosureproject.org, and it's a 1991 document from the CIA. It's not been contested. It's authenticated. And on page 6, it says, we have contacted all the major wire services and all the major networks and news magazines and outlets to spin, kill, change, alter stories to our advantage when need be.
That's right.
It's paraphrasing.
Right.
You can go read it for yourself. Go read the document. If you know how to read English, you can read it. So I point this out to people only to say that every word I'm saying on this show is true, even though for most people they're reeling going, Jesus, this can't be true. But it is. And the thing is that, our civilization is a faint shadow of the world we could have. We could have had by now.
Yeah.
If this information and these technologies could have been out 50 years ago.
Tell us about the moon base. I love that one because there's some independent corroboration of some sorts. There's a base on the dark side of the moon, and some of the people that were involved in the cutting room, where they were cutting the pictures that were taken of the aircraft that went around the dark side, they snipped out these pictures and they showed it to this gentleman, and he relates about the base on the dark side of the moon and how we at one point even tried to send an atomic device up to explode on the moon to demonstrate to the Russians that we were so powerful, and how it was interacted and intercepted by other intelligent agencies, entities.
There's a whole nexus of things dealing with this, by the way, and we have multiple independent corroborating witnesses to this area. One of them is this man you're referring to who had a top secret clearance and was at Langley Air Force Base, and he was asked to come in to do some work on some equipment that had broken down. And when he got in there, this person was there who apparently was very deeply disturbed by what they had been seeing because he was being forced to keep a secret. And what was going on is that at that time, in the mid-60s, we had what was called the Lunar Orbiter, and this was the spacecraft that orbited the moon before the manned landing went there to map out the surface of the moon and what have you. Well, it was sending back images first through a national security agency link up through this facility that was ultra top secret at Langley Air Force Base, where images of artificial structures already on the moon, we're talking mid-60s here before we ever landed, some of which were very ancient, some of which looked newer, he said, and very expensive, were in what's called the terminator. It's not technically the dark side, it's where the light and the shadow, the light and the dark side of the moon would kind of come together, sort of like what's called a terminator is the technical term for that area of the moon. And it was interesting, he says, because the pictures were very clear, they were even back then digital. He said that this man said, he said, oh my God, what are you going to do with this? Isn't the world going to know this is enormous news? And the man said, oh no. He says, this will go into a black hole that nobody will ever know about. Well, years went by, and this guy, Carl, was our top secret witness, said, you know, he thought surely, you know, he was an Air Force guy, top secret clearance. He thought surely, you know, in a year or two or maybe a couple years, this would be all talked about in the media. What a huge scientific discovery, on and on and on. And here it was 2001 when he came forward with our group, and it was still not being talked about. So, you know, but he personally saw that, and we have another couple of witnesses who've seen the same or similar images. On top of it, you're referring to testimony from a man named Colonel Dietrichson. This is a full colonel who was at one time the guy in charge of the Atomic Energy Commission, the old AEC, which became the DOE, to go around and inspect security in all the nuclear facilities in the United States. And he had learned that these ET craft apparently were very, very concerned with these nuclear weapons and the threat they pose to life on Earth, but also the fact that we had plans to put them out into space. And he learned of this one event, which has been corroborated by another man, that we fired a missile with a nuclear tip on it with the intent to have it hit the moon and have it explode so that we could show off basically our technological prowess to the Soviets during the Cold War. Well, as this missile became exo-atmospheric, meaning as it left our atmosphere, an extraterrestrial vehicle came in and intercepted it and neutralized it so that that couldn't happen. So, you know, a lot of people don't understand that there have been things like this going on. Of course, we're talking an event here that was in the 60s, this was 40 years ago. And one of the big issues I have pointed out to people is I think that none of these extraterrestrial civilizations, and I think there are multiple of them out there that are observing us, are hostile towards us. But I think they're very, very concerned with our hostility. See, I turn the whole, you know, X-Files, spooky alien thing on its head. I go, come on. You know, if they were really hostile towards us, given the stupid things we've been doing for half a century, we'd be a cinder floating in space, quite frankly. It's obvious that they're very concerned with our hostility. We have several witnesses who are at a Strategic Air Command facility in Minot, North Dakota. When one of these, several of these craft actually came over the nuclear silos and took at least 16 intercontinental ballistic missiles offline so that they could not be launched, as a way of saying, look, please don't go so far as to launch all these things and destroy this beautiful planet. Interestingly, they weren't just taken on the U.S. of A. The same thing we've learned from Soviet KGB files were going on in the Soviet Union. So it was obvious that something happened at the time that we detonated the first nuclear weapon in the 40s, and then quickly began to develop the ability to go into space. The confluence of the development of these world-destroying weapon systems at the same time that we were about to go out as a space-faring people put a big red flag over Earth. This is my own hypothesis, but it's logical. And I think at that time, if you go back and do a historical review of what happened in the 40s, 50s, 60s, there was an enormous number of documented ET craft sightings over nuclear weapon storage areas, nuclear manufacturing areas, missile silos, and what have you. And Colonel Dietrichson states in his testimony, which you can see, he says point blank, every single nuclear facility he visited, whether it was Oak Ridge or Los Alamos, had these ET craft that had been documented around the area doing reconnaissance, and were obviously very concerned with what we were doing.
1 minute.
And it makes sense.
1 minute. Now let's get it out. People want to find out more, and they want to look in the eyes of these doctors, these scientists, these admirals. They want to see that for themselves. At least do us a favor. At least go to www.disclosureproject.org. At least call in the USA 1-888-382-7384. Join. What could they do? You tell the folks out there. What can they do to become more interactive to make this happen, Doctor?
Well, the first thing they can do is, as you mentioned, get on the website, get the materials, and get educated to what the truth is. The second thing is to tell other people, network it and what have you. The third thing is that we're encouraging everyone to take the videotape of this National Press Club event we had 2001, put it on their local cable access channel. The other thing we need, quite frankly, is we need serious institutional and individual funding support. We've done all this without a staff. It's been a backbreaking thing. We need more funding support from people who want to see the truth out. And the other thing is that we're still asking for people who are witnesses to these projects or who may know about the technology to come forward to become further witnesses to join the ones that we already have. And then lastly, if there's anyone out there listening who knows how to build one of these extraordinary energy devices, we have formed a research group to try to replicate that and to get it out to the public without having to go through this logjam of secret programs. So anyone who knows how to build one of these so-called free energy devices or zero-point energy devices should contact me through the website so that we can get it tested, reproduced, and disclosed to the public so we can begin to move on to catching up to where civilization could have been in the 1950s and 60s if all this illegal secrecy hadn't hijacked our future.
Wonderful, Doctor. Thank you so very much. If there's a big response, I hope that we'll be able to get you back on a live show. And in addition to that, of course, we want to follow up on your success. And we want to use the Internet as much as possible because until they close it, and they will fix it so that we won't have the same free access that we had. They're already working on that. But until that happens, the Internet is the key to us being able to talk to each other and talk to large groups without the permission of the almighty government. And with that, I want to thank you so very much, Doctor, for
thank you.
Honoring us with your presence.
I appreciate your help.
Absolutely. That's going to do it for this edition of The Other Side. I, again, would like to thank our guest, Dr. Stephen Greer, his website, disclosureproject.org, and his book, Extraterrestrial Contact, The Existence of Implications. It's available at Amazon.com. I'm looking at it right now. If you'd like to contact Mr. DUI regarding any legal matter, his phone number is 866-NO-DUI. That is 866-666-6384. His website is www.mrdui.com. For Attorney Eugene Ellis, I'm Scott Wood, and this has been The Other Side of the Story. Stay tuned. The Business Talk Radio Network is next, right here on Cash 1700, where money talks.
The opinions expressed in the preceding program are strictly those of its host, guests, and callers, and not those of the station, its staff, management, or its sponsors. Any opinion expressed should not be considered as legal advice, fact, or law. Please consult qualified legal counsel if you have legal questions.